Thursday night, Attorney General Loretta Lynch spoke at the annual dinner of civil rights group Muslim advocates. She expressed concern about increased anti-Muslim rhetoric and hate crimes in the United States. We also heard from the executive director of Muslim Advocates and Congressman Andre Carson. This is an hour and 15 minutes.
I am so disturbed. I am truly frightened. That was a text message I recently received from an American Muslim mother of 2 young girls. But I also received this message from another mother of 2 young children. We are counting on Muslim advocates to help us in this very scary and difficult time. It is why we do what we do at Muslim Advocates. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is a very special evening. As Dean mentioned, this is actually the 10-year anniversary of Muslim Advocates. And it all started 10 years ago, right here in Washington, D.C., on a snowy January weekend in a conference room in a law firm downtown. You see, a group of American Muslim lawyers and policy experts from the government, private practice, from the civil rights world. We came together with an urgent task at hand to defend the founding values of our country. And that weekend launched Muslim Advocates, a national legal organization dedicated to promoting freedom, justice, and equality for all. We have come a long way and have made progress in these last 10 years because of many people in this room and others like you. Some of you have given generously financially. Others have contributed their time and their talents. Some have been important and crucial allies in our work. And several law firms have donated thousands of hours of their legal time pro bono in support of our work. I want to take a moment to recognize someone very special who's with us this evening, Umber Khan. Umber is one of our founding board members, and at the end of this year ends her service as a member of the board of Muslim Advocates. She has provided crucial leadership and guidance, strategic communications to governance issues, and we're going to miss her, but I know she's not going to be far away. So on behalf of everyone at Muslim Advocates, our deep thanks to Umber for her leadership. Together, we are protecting the rights of Americans of all faiths in the courts and in the highest levels of government. I'm excited to share with you the progress we are making. Dean just told you about one of our very exciting legal victories we had this year. We had another exciting legal victory. In January, Muslim Advocates and our co-counsel, the Center for Constitutional Rights, were set to present oral arguments before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, which sits in Philadelphia. And this was going to be the first time that a federal appeals court would be hearing and deciding on the legality of the New York Police Department's discriminatory surveillance program, a program that was run to basically collect information and spy on American Muslims, not based on evidence of wrongdoing, but simply based on their faith, in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut. And as that day in January was approaching, I was starting to get a knot in my stomach. You see, a few days before the hearing was set to take place, the terrible attacks in Paris against the offices of the Charlie Hebdo magazine had taken place. And I was sure that world events were going to doom our case. And in fact, it was the second question from the judges. Well, in light of Paris, shouldn't the police have the authority to blanketly surveil American Muslims? It's an argument we continue to hear today from some pundits and politicians. But as the hearing began, my anxiety and my worries eased. You see, there were so many community members who packed the courtroom, who came from New York, Newark, from Philadelphia. And in fact, there were so many community members who showed up, the courthouse had to open an overflow room. The people who came included some of our plaintiffs: Iraq war vet Faraj Hassan, imams of mosques in Newark, New Jersey that had been surveilled, Imams Abdul Karim Muhammad, Imam W. Dean Sharif. These plaintiffs had shown amazing courage to take on the discriminatory policing practices of the largest police department in the country, if not the world. And they were now getting their chance to have their grievances heard by a court of law. So as the hearing began, I happened to glance up at the ceiling in the courtroom, and these words were etched in the ceiling: Justice, Guardian of Liberty. And on October 13th, justice was served. The court issued its decision, a unanimous decision against the City of New York and in favor of our plaintiffs. In fact, the court's opinion was so decisive, it contained some of the most powerful language we have seen from a federal court standing up for the rights of American Muslims since 9/11. One of those passages was this: "We have been down similar roads before. Jewish Americans during the Red Scare, African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement, and Japanese Americans during World War II are examples that readily spring to mind." The case also got ample media and attention by legal analysts. One analyst said, "This lesson about discrimination is one the nation needs to learn over and over." Our case now goes back to the trial court, and we are preparing for trial. And with your support, we will end racial and religious profiling by law enforcement once and for all. Every American has the right to feel safe in their homes, in their houses of worship, and in their communities. Earlier this year, we were all horror-struck when we heard the devastating news of the brutal murders of 3 Muslim students in Chapel Hill, North Carolina: Dia Barakat, Yusor Abu Salha, Razan Abu Salha. This has been the deadliest year to be a Muslim in America. And not long after those attacks, the Muslim community in upstate New York, Islamburg, received just horrifying news that a group, a network of anti-government militia folks were basically plotting an attack to come up to their community, attack their schools, attack their community, and kill their children. That was the intent expressed by those folks. Most of those perpetrators were arrested, thankfully, but the threat still remains. In the face of this hate violence and even death, the Barakat, the Abu Salha families, the community of Islamburg has shown amazing courage, determination, and grace. We are honored to have with us this evening Dia's brother, Faris, his former roommate, Imad Ahmed, and members of the Islamburg community, Hussein Adams, Fatma Mobley, Tahra Clark, Tahra Amatul Wadud, Matthew Gardner. I want to take a moment to thank them for their commitment to pursuing freedom and justice, not just for their families, but they're deeply committing to pursuing freedom and justice for all of our families. And for that, we thank them. We also know this. The federal government has an important, crucial role to play to ensure the public safety. And so since the beginning of this year, at Muslim Advocates, we have been in a series of intensive communications with senior officials at the Department of Justice. I've been in regular contact with the Acting Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Vinitha Gupta, and I just want to take a moment to thank her and her team for their responsiveness. Vinitha literally has been available almost at any time of day, any day of the week, to talk about these issues as they've been affecting our community. So thank you, Vinitha, to you and your team. And later this evening, you're going to hear directly from the Attorney General herself on these and other issues. It is our hope that with the Attorney General's leadership, the federal government will send a powerful message that hate, violence, intimidation based on anti-Muslim hate will meet the full force of the law. At this time of great challenge and pain for our community, we've also been very fortunate to have with us the support of our allies and partners. As Muslim Advocates has called for federal hate crimes investigations, as we have called out public officials for engaging in divisive anti-Muslim rhetoric, a number of faith groups, civil rights groups, civic organizations from across racial and ethnic lines have stood with us in support of our community. And we're very honored to have with us this evening representatives of several of these allies, including the Anti-Defamation League, Bend the Arc, the Interfaith Alliance, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Human Rights Campaign, Media Matters for America, and the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. They have stood up for American values. They have stood with Muslim advocates and the American Muslim community. And now I think it's our turn to stand up and express our appreciation for their support and friendship. I ask you to join me in standing up and expressing our support and thanks to our allies at this difficult time. We are thankful for our friends and allies, but we know they're not alone. We know we need to do more to make it easier for fair-minded Americans to stand up for what is right and what is just. That is why in the coming months, Muslim Advocates will be launching a new advocacy campaign to counter anti-Muslim bigotry, and I look forward to sharing more details about that very soon. So with the support of forward-thinking donors, we have been making progress because we are stronger together. These forward-looking donors include people like Weil. He's the proud father of these 3 adorable young kids. And like many of you, his hopes and dreams for his future is inextricably tied to his children. He emigrated to the United States from Syria as a teenager, fleeing dictatorship and seeking freedom. But now he sees this climate of hate violence and anti-Muslim rhetoric, and he's concerned about his kids. He doesn't want his kids to be raised in this kind of situation. He's doing his part to protect our nation's founding values, our shared values that bring us together as Americans. That's why he supports Muslim advocates. But Weil is not alone. There are many people like Weil in our country, including here in this room this evening. He is on your left, he is on your right, and he is you. I know you have your own hopes and dreams for your families, for your friends, that your children, your family, your neighbors will be treated with respect and dignity. Together, we can make that dream come true. We can make progress as we move forward together, because we are truly stronger together. Thank you all again so much for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Farhana. She'll be back up later with the Attorney General to interview her. I hope Farhana's words inspired you. I just want to say briefly, the stakes we're talking about in America for Muslims, especially right now, is life and death. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm not being hyperbolic. We've seen a spike in hate crimes. We've seen attacks on mosques. How many people have heard of the man named Glendon Scott Crawford? How many people have heard of Glendon Scott Crawford? A few people. He was convicted in August of plotting to go to New York State with a weapon of mass destruction to slaughter Muslims up there. He was convicted, not mental illness issue, nothing. He's gotten 25 years to life. How about Robert Doggett? How many people know Robert Doggett? Plotting to go to Islamabad with a group of men with AR-15s, with a machete to cut the Muslims to shreds and kill them. How do you tell your children people are coming to kill you just because of your faith? Those are the stakes we're dealing with. And that's the fight Muslim advocates are doing. So I hope that you'll keep it in mind. There's the cards on your table. Make a pledge. As a comedian, I'm an optimist. I think the work here of Muslim advocates is on the front line in making lives better for young people of any faith, but right now, especially Muslims. I'm also an optimist. It could be more difficult. They could give hurricanes Muslim names. That wouldn't help us. Turn on the news, Hurricane Mahmoud is coming. Run for your life. Mahmoud's a killer. That's not helpful. So Muslim advocates' work has been great. They also push the Department of Justice and local law enforcement around the country to investigate and prosecute hate crimes to the fullest extent of the law. Sometimes people turn the other look away. Muslim advocates won't let them do that. So keep them in mind. And tonight we're going to continue on now. We're excited to have the opportunity to honor an outstanding ally who's been crucial to Muslim advocates in their fight for freedom for Americans of all faiths. We'll be honoring Reverend Dr. C. Welton Gaddy, former head of the Interfaith Alliance and formidable faith leader. So great pleasure to introduce someone many of you know from Muslim Advocates. She's the deputy director there, brings a deep expertise in public policy. We've worked together on our campaign against the MTA. She used to work with the ACLU, and she's really a powerhouse and a fire starter. Please welcome Naheed Kersey, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening. Tonight I have the honor of presenting the Voice of Courage Award to the Reverend Dr. C. Welton Gaddy. Dr. Gaddy recently finished his time as Executive Director of the Interfaith Alliance, our close ally and partner. For 16 years, he flew back and forth between Monroe, Louisiana and Washington, D.C., so that he could remain the pastor at Northminster Baptist Church. People who work with Dr. Gaddy often say that he's the first person in any room to speak truth to power. Loud and proud, they say. If he sees something wrong, he will call it out. You've likely heard him passionately fight against bigotry on many of his media appearances, whether it's MSNBC or his radio show, State of Belief. At the Interfaith Alliance, Dr. Gaddy used his platform to challenge misconceptions and promote understanding about the American Muslim community. and he certainly doesn't accept the idea that we have to choose between national security and civil rights. We became close with Dr. Gaddy during the hysteria surrounding the Park 51 Community Center in New York City. All of us remember the inflammatory rhetoric coming from hate groups that provoked hate crimes, protests, and intimidation of Muslims and mosques all over the country. The community was terrified. It was, unfortunately, a time not unlike that which we are experiencing today. Dr. Gaddy immediately understood the importance of building public alliances with Muslims. He worked with us to set up a meeting with then Attorney General Eric Holder. And during that meeting, he certainly didn't pull any punches. He called on the Attorney General and the President to do more and to do better. And when Peter King organized the first ever hearings targeting a religious group, American Muslims, Dr. Gaddy and his team helped us form a coalition of over 60 groups to fight back. Since then, we've worked together to respond to Terry Jones and Quran burnings, bigoted FBI trainings, and there was certainly no bigger supporter of our advocacy to stop surveillance and harassment of American Muslims by the NYPD. In fact, his team single-handedly coordinated one of the most powerful amicus briefs in support of our case. Even now, he's one of the first people we hear from in a time of crisis for the community. He always asks, "What can I do to help?" He said about leaving the Interfaith Alliance, "I don't have the sense that either Jefferson or God is wringing their hands because I'm leaving." Now, I don't know about Jefferson or God, but I can tell you that the hand-wringing at Muslim advocates started the day you said you were moving on. Thank you so much for everything you've done for the American Muslim community. Please join me in recognizing Reverend Dr. C. Welton Gaddy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. To be perfectly honest with you this evening, I accept this award from Muslim advocates with mixed emotions, the most powerful of which is profound gratitude. I'm thankful beyond measure that the boards of Interfaith Alliance gave me an opportunity to spend every day at the intersection of religion, government, and politics, advocating for our first freedom and encouraging interreligious cooperation. I had the good fortune of making my passion my work and my work my passion. My presence in that office allowed me the privilege of regularly learning from and cooperatively interacting with Muslim advocates. Our shared values afforded me ample opportunities to express my patriotism through efforts to move our nation closer to full compliance with our Constitution, and conviction that religion can be inclusive, healing, and compassionate in its relationship to all people. Working alongside individuals who also understand the importance of religious freedom and the necessity of equal justice for all, individuals who share my conviction that real religion pulsates with mutual respect and personal compassion, My colleagues in Muslim Advocates became my friends. Farhana is not only a strong and wise national leader, she is also a smart, courageous woman whom I consider a sister. Gratitude for this honor this evening comes easily. But negative emotions also disturb my heart and mind tonight. Not all is well with our nation or our world. Understatement. The most fundamental values of both religion and democracy, so prominent in our work together, are under siege to an extent that the meaning, integrity, and quality of freedom in religious freedom for all Americans are seriously threatened. When candidates for the highest office in our land sound like bigots with favor anarchy over democracy, something is bad wrong. When any person's religious identity can be considered a justification for hate and discrimination, the health of the soul of our republic needs to be re-examined. Having spent most of my adult life promoting, protecting, and defending religious freedom, I must tell you that I do not think we could pass the First Amendment to the Constitution today. Extremely short-sighted people are seeking to change the definition of liberty in order to claim a freedom for themselves that they refuse to extend to others. I hurt with you as well as stand beside you in support, knowing that Muslims are under a severe attack that includes despicable violence by people who don't understand either the Constitution or Islam. I'm reminded of the dark days of the Civil Rights Movement, when under threats of danger, devotees of basic constitutional rights had to seek protection through lobbying for new laws or insisting on the enforcement of laws already on our books, while at the same time trying to change the hearts and minds of the American people. We want to change those minds. We have to have those laws. Thankfully, Muslim Advocates is aware of that strategy. You've heard it. Legal initiatives are imperative. No office in our nation is superior to the guarantee of the issues of freedom and justice for all people. When it comes to issues of the heart, and I'm speaking now to the Muslim community, when it comes to issues of the heart, you should not have to go it alone. It is far past time for all religions in this land, majority religions and minority religions, to position themselves alongside you as Muslims and to remain alongside you tirelessly advocating for eradicating hate and practicing injustice as you're having to experience. What Farhana and I had the honor of doing together, along with other colleagues, sitting at a table with the Attorney General of the United States, seeking wisdom that would move us through crises with no abdication of support for the Constitution, testifying in Congress to expose the lies being told about Muslims, and clarifying the difference between a religion of peace and a sick organization perpetrating violence, and encouraging the White House to highlight the plight as well as the benefits of all minority religions in our nation. That work was fulfilling and fun for us. It is work that needs to be done. No, it is work that has to be done in media, coffee houses, humanist gatherings, board tables, universities, atheist organizations, and houses of worship all across this nation. If Muslims are not free in this nation, none of us are free in this nation. I'm very grateful for Muslim advocates and for this honor that you have given to me. And I hope that our time of celebration this evening can serve as an inspiration and a time for all of us to recommit ourselves to doing the work of freedom together for the integrity of religion and the vitality of our democracy, and please God, for the possibility of peace. Thank you.
Beautiful words by Reverend Getty. All right, so we're going to continue on. Our next speaker is a friend of mine all the way from New Jersey as well. He's a council member in Teaneck, but he was a mayor. He was the first mayor who was Muslim, I think, in the history. Oh, no. Or he's going at the end. Sorry, buddy. You're stuck there. I don't really know the guy. I just met him before. No, I'm kidding. He's my buddy. So introduce Congressman Carson? Okay. So right now, here's someone I actually know. Great guy. I know them both. He's a member of Congress. He's in his fourth full term. Comes from the great state of Indiana. Congressman Carson has worked to protect the rights of Americans from all walks of life. He's an advocate for everyone. Muslim advocates have been lucky to have Congressman Carson as an ally in Congress who stands up for freedom, justice, and equality for all. He's, since the dreadful Peter King hearings, you guys remember that, 5 years ago, which painted the American Muslim community with a broad stroke, Congressman Carson has spoken out to public officials about the issue. He has brought the rising anti-Muslim bigotry and hate to the attention of his colleagues. In fact, he convened a briefing with members of Congress this year with Representative Judy Chu and Congressman Keith Ellison about anti-Muslim bigotry and why it's important. It's a great pleasure to introduce a great guy and a friend of mine, Congressman Andre Carson, everybody.
Well, thank you, Dean, for that very kind and generous introduction. Sorry, Mayor. Also, I want to thank the Muslim Advocate staff, of course, Farhana for her excellence and brilliance and her tenacity and just her leadership. Also, her partner in righteousness, Nahid Qureshi, thank you. Absolutely. You know, it's so nice to be here to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Muslim Advocates. It's an organization that I've worked very closely with throughout my term in Congress. I have many great friends who are Muslim advocates. We can speak openly, very honestly, about this great community. It's something that is increasingly important due to the circumstances unfolding in our world today. We're all familiar with what this great organization stands for, what it's all about. But what many people are probably unfamiliar with is that this group is able to get great things done in Washington, D.C. each and every year. Muslim Advocates has a presence and has held a presence on Capitol Hill like very few other Muslim organizations who are represented here and who do wonderful work. And you all do great work in your own right. And I think Muslim Advocates is special in their own right by excelling to draw members of Congress together to support important causes, leading the charge to call for tremendous policy changes in the administration or even consideration of legislation in both the House and the Senate. They bring together Muslim leaders to ensure that decision makers understand stereotypes and bigotry facing American Muslims each and every day. They hold members of Congress accountable for doing what is right, even when it's not politically expedient. I often refer to Muslim advocates as my eyes and ears on the ground across this country. And I appreciate, and I know I rely on them to deliver me with the utmost, the purest information, the most reliable information, and the kind of information that I think will help those of us in Congress make sound decisions, regardless of our school of thought. I trust and look up to their staff, knowing that they are experts on law and policy matters. I know their work has touched many lives. I look forward to working with them in the future. I think about Muslim advocates, and I think about, throughout history, how the kind of advocacy that they represent has sparked change in our society. Think about those advocates who are on the ground, like Frederick Douglass, working with brothers and sisters in the abolitionist movement to do what Congress refused to do and push then President Abraham Lincoln to emancipate the slaves. I think about the advocates who were on the ground when Congress refused to do what needed to be done to push then President Truman to desegregate the military. I think about those numerous advocates in the form of Fannie Lou Hamer and C.T. Vivian and Dr. Martin Luther King and A. Philip Randolph and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and others who were on the ground, along with the faith community, doing what needed to be done to push Congress and President Johnson to sign the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. And I think about the great work that you're doing today. And I think about the importance of having our top law enforcement officer in the country to be an advocate on behalf of the American people. That's why it's a tremendous honor to introduce the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch. And this is her first public event with the American Muslim community. I met her in New York when she was U.S. Attorney at an event for the Muslim community. But you have to understand that as a child, she and her father would literally visit the courthouse in Durham, North Carolina, to watch the court proceedings. Her interest in the courts grew out of the story she shared with her grandfather. He was a sharecropper who helped African Americans in the South move to the North to flee persecution based on racist Jim Crow laws. And even before becoming the chief law enforcement officer of these United States, she used the courts in the fight for justice, liberty, and equality. And notably, she played a critical role in prosecuting those New York City police officers who physically and sexually assaulted Abner Louima, a Haitian immigrant living in New York. Attorney General Lynch began her career in public service as a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, working on narcotics, violent crime, public corruption, and civil rights cases. And she was appointed as a U.S. Attorney by both President Clinton and President Obama. In private practice, she performed extensive pro bono work protecting human rights. After a career in public service, Attorney General Lynch made history as the first African-American woman to serve in this great role. She's tough. Now, since she was first nominated, I've had a chance to get to know her, and one thing I can say for certain, our community and our country, we have an Attorney General that deeply cares for justice and for fairness. When Muslim Americans are held back by discrimination or threatened by hatred, we have an advocate at the Department of Justice. We should feel confident that she will not only stand with Muslims in our most difficult times, but she will stand with all Americans to make sure they have equality under the law. Brothers and sisters, friends and family, please welcome our Attorney General. Get on your feet for Loretta Lynch to the stage as she joins Farhana for a deep conversation about the climate of bigotry and Islamophobia.
Madam Attorney General, welcome. It is an honor to have you join us in your first public event with the American Muslim community. I must say, it couldn't come at a more important time for our community. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for this invitation. Let me make sure that my microphone is on, just to make sure. If you cannot hear me, let me know. I think I'm still muted. Okay. How's that? No? I will tell you that rarely have I had trouble being heard. Usually it's the opposite reaction. It's like, will she stop? I think is it coming up? All right, let me slide this down a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get this repositioned and see, because this is, thank you so much. So just so you know, my stunt director here is the extremely talented Vanita Gupta, the head of my Civil Rights Division. As you can see, she saves me on a daily basis from any number of issues, but also does tremendous work in an important area. So I'm quite glad she was here tonight. So let's make sure we have this in the right spot. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we wired? Are we wired? Are we ready?
Yes.
Outstanding, outstanding. So, despite that technical issue caused solely by me, and let me apologize, let me thank you, Farhana, and the entire board and group for this invitation. I'm so excited to be here. And let me also say that I truly appreciate this invitation on what I understand is your 10th anniversary. It is very, very special when groups as dedicated and as focused as yours invite me to share an important event. It truly, truly means a lot to me personally and to me as the Attorney General. So I thank you for this invitation.
It's our honor. Thank you. Thank you for accepting. So maybe just to kick things off, could you maybe start us off by telling us what you see as your highest priorities as Attorney General?
Sure, surely, absolutely, and I thank you for that. Obviously, there are a number of issues that challenge the Department of Justice, many of which the Muslim advocates are deeply involved in, and I also thank you for your partnership on so many of those issues as well. The work of the department is varied, it's wide, it's multifaceted. I am focusing in the time that I have on 4 main areas, but it in no way diminishes issues that we discover in areas and others. And I'm focusing on national security and terrorism, because as we have seen, the threats are ever evolving and they are widespread. They affect us, they affect our partners, and I think, frankly, they are affecting us in really deep and fundamental ways. They're causing us to look at how we evaluate certain crimes and the language that we use to describe them, and forcing us, and I think will be ultimately a very positive way, to really grapple with the issue of protecting ourselves and also protecting our rights. So those are very, very important issues to me. I'm also focusing on the issues of cybersecurity. If anyone has been near a computer lately, you know that you need to have basically a 12-year-old to help you interpret it. And so what we see, however, is that with the explosion of the ease and the simplicity and, frankly, the great abilities of the cyber world, of living in the cloud, how it makes us open for exploitation, particularly when it comes to the business community and the economic and intellectual property rights of so many of our corporations. You know, we have an extremely strong entrepreneurial community here in the United States. Muslim Americans are a very important part of that. So it's not just the large multinationals or the established companies that deal with this issue. Oh, this is great. Thank you. Oh, this is great. Thank you very much. So I will tell you that I promise not to sing, despite having this snazzy new mic. But as I was saying, with respect to cybersecurity, as we expand into new and other areas of business, particularly when it comes to the entrepreneurial spirit of our country, so much work nowadays, particularly with young designers and developers, is being done online. The theft of intellectual property is a multi-billion-dollar issue, and certainly we're working in some important ways, including with China. I just recently had a ministerial this week on those issues. Another main priority of mine is human trafficking. And it's because it grew out of work that I did in Brooklyn as the U.S. attorney there, and the cases that I saw with young people, primarily women, but not always, but primarily women and girls, lured from a host of countries with false promises, promises of a better life, the promises of an American life. And those promises were turned into nightmares. And as the more I looked into that issue, the more I realized what a widespread and largely invisible crime this is. And how so many of our young women and girls are at risk, and once they fall into this, how hard it is to get out, and even when they can be rescued, how difficult it can be for them to reintegrate into society. And I frankly think that there's too much value in the power of women and girls to allow a single one of them to be thrown away. So that's why that's a priority of mine. And my other main priority has been focusing on the relationship between law enforcement and the communities we serve, particularly communities of color and communities involving ethnic minorities. I think it's an issue that I've been looking at, frankly, since my earliest days as a prosecutor in New York City. The congressman mentioned one of the cases that I did. It certainly highlighted that for me in some very, very significant and meaningful ways. And I also did some cases with the Asian American Chinese community as well, and had occasion to work on those issues. So that's been a priority of mine as well. And the myriad of other things that the department does.
Great. Well, let's maybe start to dig down into some specific issues. And I think an issue on the minds of many American Muslims is that since the tragic attacks in Paris 3 weeks ago, there's been a decidedly disturbing uptick in anti-Muslim rhetoric. It's been very divisive, and many of us, frankly, feel that the rhetoric is the worst that it's ever been, and we're very concerned about the environment creates a very toxic environment that might even give license to some to engage in acts of violence. And so in light of these attacks and this toxic climate, what message does the federal government have for the American Muslim community?
Thank you. I think you could not have touched on a more timely issue. Certainly in the wake of Paris, which as a country and as a part of Europe has been grappling with anti-Muslim rhetoric for some time now because of smaller incidents. This large one is really the equivalent of their 9/11. And certainly, as we saw here in the U.S., an incredibly disturbing rise in anti-Muslim rhetoric. The fear that you have just mentioned is, in fact, my greatest fear as a prosecutor, as someone who is sworn to the protection of all of the American people, which is that the rhetoric will be accompanied by acts of violence. Obviously, the incidents in Paris were a tragedy, and I know that everyone sympathizes with the victims there and the tremendous loss of life, and we continue to support that investigation. But what I think it's important to note is that the Department of Justice's view is that we can and will do that, but we also will not give in to fear. And my message to not just the Muslim community, but the entire American community is we cannot give in to the fear that these backlashes are really based on. And I understand. We all remember, whether it's 9/11 or a neighbor of yours is assaulted, when you feel that fear, that sense of lack of control, and the inability to do something about it, start to spin and try and find ways that you think will be the easy fix, right? The simple way to corral an issue or to contain a concern. And so in many eyes, anti-Muslim rhetoric becomes that path. What's greatly concerning to us is the rise that you've mentioned. I remember 9/11, and those were very, very difficult days. I heard some disturbing things from people that I never thought I would hear certain things from. And now I think the rise of the internet, the ability of people to issue hateful speech of all types from the anonymity of a screen is something that increases that rhetoric. Now, obviously, this is a country that is based on free speech, but when it edges towards violence, when we see the potential for someone lifting that mantle of anti-Muslim rhetoric, or, as we saw after 9/11, violence directed at individuals who may not even be Muslims, but may be perceived to be Muslims. And they will suffer just as well, just as much. When we see that, we will take action. My view is that we cannot be ruled by fear, because when we're ruled by fear, we actually are not making ourselves safe. We're not effective. We're not thinking things through. We're not looking at what works. We have now, sadly, a lot of experience in this area and a lot of experience in this field. This is what we do 24/7. And I know people are saying, oh, if we stop the refugees and sign a bill and make people sign to guarantee them, this is not the way. I will look at anything and consider anything that will keep the American people safe, but simply rushing to judgment on something. As a friend of mine once said, you take aggressive action, you don't take impetuous action, because then you waste your resources and you end up doing more harm than good. So my message to the Muslim community is that we stand with you in this. I think, again, one of the reasons why I particularly appreciate this invitation is that Muslim advocates understand the power of language, the power for harm, as we've been talking about, but the incredible power of language for good, the incredible power of language to educate, to inform, and to illustrate. And you also understand the power of organization and focusing that voice. And I think it is so tremendously important in this time to let your voices be heard. And as you do that, please know that the Department of Justice and this Attorney General will be your partner in that effort.
Thank you for those kind words and clarity, frankly. I think that is needed now more than ever in our country, so thank you very much. We've also been noticing an uptick in hate crime incidents affecting individuals, our institutions, and in the wake of the Paris attacks, we've actually been noticing a disturbing, even greater rate of attacks. And so I was wondering if you could tell us what the Justice Department is doing to hold perpetrators of hate crimes accountable.
This is an incredibly important area for us. And as I mentioned before, Vanita Gupta is here, the head of my Civil Rights Division. Also, Robert Musi is here, very important partner in the leadership of my Civil Rights Division as well. Because for us, this has been an important issue since 9/11, but I would say in the last several years, and as you mentioned most recently, we also have seen this uptick, and it's incredibly disturbing.
And had I known Vanita was going to be here, I wouldn't have bought my crib sheet, because the only notes I brought were I wanted to make sure that I had the information on this issue if it came up, because I'm incredibly proud of the work that our Civil Rights Division does in terms of cases, but also investigations and counseling in areas. But where we do see anti-Muslim rhetoric and actions turn into violence, we do take action. Criminal prosecutions, the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Hate Crimes Act has been incredibly effective for us. But I did want to just note that I think we have charged 225 defendants with hate crimes offenses over the last 6 years, most of those in the last 3 years. Since 9/11, we've had over 1,000 investigations into acts of anti-Muslim hatred, including rhetoric and bigoted actions, with over 45 prosecutions arising out of that. I think, sadly, that number is going to continue. I think it's important, however, that as we, again, talk about the importance of free speech, we make it clear that actions predicated on violent talk are not America. They are not who we are, they're not what we do, and they will be prosecuted. So I want that message to be clear also.
Great, thank you. Another area of concern that our community has been facing in recent years is when our community is trying to build mosques or expand mosques, and they essentially encounter opposition at the local level that sometimes is with the veneer of being a zoning issue, but under the surface it's motivated by anti-Muslim kind of attitudes. And obviously our country has a robust First Amendment guaranteeing freedom of worship, and that includes building of houses of mosques. And so I was wondering, what advice do you have for our community members who are simply trying to go about their First Amendment right to practice their faith and to build a house of worship?
Well, obviously, with my own background, I think that's a very important area. I mean, houses of worship really can be the heart of a community. They can be the cradle of a family. They can be places where our children go to learn not just our faith, but to make friends and to build their own connections. And they're essential to a healthy America. And every community deserves the right to have those houses of worship operate in safety and in peace. And as the Muslim community expands, which is a wonderful thing, I mean, Muslims have been in this country as long as any other group, and we have some of the oldest and most beautiful mosques in this hemisphere.
That's right.
We have seen, frankly, a disturbing increase in the rhetoric against them. And I think what you're going to see are, as people continue down this path, which I think, frankly, is an unfortunate one, but it is one driven by fear. People will try and use things such as you mentioned, such as the zoning laws, to try and make them become a bludgeon against a peaceful religion and a house of worship. I mean, frankly, wouldn't you rather have a house of worship in your midst as opposed to another strip mall, you know, or I don't know, some other thing? Maybe not. But in terms of the value of it, it's something that the value has been seen for years until we get these backlashes. We have a very, very active practice in the Arlupa litigation, which is the residential. I'm going to get the whole name right, but it's wrong. But essentially, it protects the freedom to build a mosque and also to practice religion. Most of the cases under that particular statute that get the most attention tend to be involving institutionalized persons, the rights of prisoners to practice their faith. But also, it focuses on the right to build a house of worship in an appropriately zoned area. And so we have a number of matters in which we have successfully defended the rights of mosques to either expand, as is often the case, or to build. And I think probably one of the ones that was the most known was the Murfreesboro case, where I think the law was bent and twisted in a way that showed how strong this backlash can be. And so again, what I would say that is when you see efforts like that, and you have concerns like that, please reach out to the Department of Justice. That is what we are here for, and we are honored to take those cases.
Great.
I should also add that in respect to not just houses of worship, but other areas in which we're seeing growing areas of concern also, and we have for some time now, specifically involve our children and the issues of bullying in the schools. And that's an area in which we have partnered with the Department of Education to provide guidance to schools on how to handle situations where students come to them and they feel bullied. And we've seen this for a number of years, and we saw it a lot in the New York area, unfortunately, where there'd be a backlash against the Muslim community in general. And I think, we as parents often feel that, we can withstand these issues and we can at least argue back or talk back. But, our children go to school and they don't have those tools yet. They don't know. And kids are very good at finding that spot and pushing. And so we are very, very active in that front as well. And so what I would urge people to do, if you are aware of situations where children are involved, please contact the Department of Justice and the Department of Education. We can provide guidance, we can have conversations. Everything need not result in a lawsuit, but some things do have to go to that area. We have, as you may know, opened an investigation into the case of the young man in Irving, Texas. We will see where that investigation goes. So you have extreme situations like that, but you also have those everyday things that happen, and we have an important role to play. So please think of us there as well.
Great. Well, thank you. And let me first say that is great to hear that the department has opened an investigation into the Irving, Texas high school. That case of the treatment of Ahmed Muhammad, the kid with the homemade clock, was an issue of great concern and really struck a chord with many parents. So really appreciate the department's leadership on that, as well as the Murfreesboro case. The department's role in defending the right of the community was absolutely crucial. And I don't know if you know this, Madam Attorney General, but the community, after the department prevailed, the government prevailed on the side of the community was able to proceed, build a mosque, and it opened a little over a year ago, and they're a flourishing part of the community and supported by their interfaith allies in that community. So thank you for that important work. I want to turn now to a different issue, something you touched on just briefly in your opening remarks, and that's the issue of law enforcement and community relations. And as Congressman Carson mentioned, in the early part of your career as a federal prosecutor, you were part of the high-profile case of the brutal assault of Abner Louima, and around that time, there was also the case of Amadou Diallo. So there was these very high-profile cases of police brutality, and that was in the late 90s, in which there was a public outcry that, hey, we really need to do something about excessive use of force by law enforcement. And yet today, it seems like we're having that conversation all over again, from Michael Brown to Eric Gardner to Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, and then more recently, of course, Jamar Clark and Laquan McDonald. And so to some, it seems like not much has changed. Why hasn't much changed in these last 15 years?
Yeah. I do spend a lot of time thinking about that, in particular about the parallels between the Louima case and the cases that we see today. I will say I think we had, as difficult and as highly charged as the environment is now when it comes to police community relations and these specific cases that we're talking about. In a sense, the environment has changed. It's become more difficult because we're seeing these things that are very, very vivid and hard to watch, and frankly painful to watch. When we did the Louima case, the case occurred in 1998 and it went to trial in 99. We didn't have the videotapes that people have now, even though most of the altercation occurred on the street. Some of the initial beatings, now the sexual assault in the police station was in a bathroom, but we didn't have videotapes. We had to pull it out of police witnesses and also civilian witnesses who did not want to come forward. And if you've ever thought about a difficult witness, imagine a police officer testifying in that kind of case. But we had officers who came forward and said, this is so wrong. But the atmosphere at the time was that this crime is so horrific, and this action, as described, is so unbelievable that a lot of people had trouble believing that it had occurred. And they weren't really unreasonable in that, because who would think that uniformed New York City police officers would, in addition to beating someone in the back of a car, use a broomstick and sodomize him as punishment also. And for us, we had medical records. Without those medical records, though, I don't think that we would have been able to carry the day ultimately. In the middle of the trial, the lead defendant pled guilty. Now we have, because of technology, frankly, we have visual evidence of things that occur. Not just the witness cell phones, but the surveillance cameras, the security cameras, and of course police body cameras and dashboard cameras. And as I mentioned before, they are hard to watch, but they are so important to watch, because they have given us the ability to open up this dialogue. And it has really meant that not only law enforcement, but other members of the community who, for a variety of reasons, never really accepted that this kind of misconduct went on, now have to see what so many groups have been saying for so many years. And when when I go out and I do a lot of talking to police groups and minority groups and different community groups as well, and the refrain among the police is, oh, gee, that wouldn't happen. And I understand that, because no one wants to think that your group of people that you support and know about would do something like that. And the majority of them don't. When we did the Louima case, we actually got a tremendous amount of support from NYPD officers, because they viewed that action as so not only disgraceful, but they knew what it would bring on the entire department. But you've got community groups saying, no, this does happen a lot. This happens all the time. And when people would talk about whether it's a stop and frisk, or just discourteous treatment, or actual abuse, people would say, well, it's probably not that bad. Or they would literally say, I just can't believe that would happen. And that, in some ways, was the result. And so people had the dialogue, and people in the community understood completely what people were talking about. People outside the community managed to move away from it. And people move away from painful things. These videos mean that we cannot do that. And frankly, it has, in many ways, forced a discussion within law enforcement that has been long overdue, and that has in many ways been very productive. It's been painful. It's not an easy thing to change. But now when I go out, I talk to police chiefs and I talk to the rank and file, and they say that this is not who we want to be. And they come to the department and they will request assistance. They'll request that we come in and help them with training and help them with issues. Not every department, obviously. We still have a very active pattern of practice going on, and I'm sure that will continue. But the number of officers that I've talked to, particularly the younger officers, the minority officers, who say, I became a police officer because I want to stop kids going down the wrong path. Give me the tools and training to do that. They can look at these videos and say, that's not what I want to be. And the community deals with that and says, this is the example of what we have to stop. So it's a different environment in that sense. But in many ways, it's a more painful conversation. But I think we can use it to get to a better place. We can really use it to come up with consistent standards, with training, with possibly consistent standards on collection of data of these incidents of use of force. We need national data on these incidents. And I talk to police departments also, and they will say, we agree, but it's burdensome. But when they do it through our consent decrees, they say, it really is useful, it really is helpful. Right. And that's why we're talking with police groups now on getting national standards for the data and collection of use of force and other incidents as well. This is really vital to the discussion also.
Okay, wonderful. We have time for one more question. Maybe just something to have the audience get to know you a little bit. What has been the most rewarding part of your career?
Well, I have to tell you, being Attorney General is pretty good. It is pretty good. But I have to say, I think if you talk to most people, they'll probably, and with that question, they'll probably look back on a point that at the time, or a situation they were in at the time that they didn't realize was so impactful, but looking back and it was the work that I was able to do when I was in private practice at a firm that I know you know well.
Yes.
And I spent a significant amount of time over several years doing pro bono work at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And I taught a trial advocacy clinic there with a group of other lawyers for several years, from 2001 through 2007. And then in the summer of 2005, the tribunal needed assistance with a witness tampering investigation. And they asked me to come in and do a special investigation for them. And so I spent most of the summer of 2005, which was 10 years ago, in Rwanda interviewing genocide survivors. In order to deal with the witness tampering investigation, I had to go back and reinvestigate the original massacre that was the topic of some testimony that possibly had been tainted. And it was a tremendous experience. I spent a lot of time delving into the history of frankly, one of the most horrific acts that I think civilization has seen, when one group tried to wipe another from the face of the earth. And it was rewarding as a prosecutor, was moving as a person, and in many ways it shook me, but it made me think a lot about the basis for why we have this situation in so many instances, in so many ways, of man's inhumanity to man. You know, whether it's tribalism, whether it's racism, whether it's xenophobia, you know, whether it's the anti-Muslim backlash and violence that we're talking about. You know, we spend so much time and energy finding ways to divide ourselves from each other, and then thinking, aha, now that I've found the difference, I can act on it. And it's really been an eye-opening experience to me to see this. You know, I don't know the reason why. I do not pretend to understand the human condition enough to know why we fall victim to this time and time again. You know, I don't know that. But I did see, as a result of the tribunal, and I've been able to see, frankly, as Attorney General, is what happens when people of goodwill, and in many instances good faiths, plural, come together and decide to stop it. And when we descend into the heart of that darkness, be it a genocide, be it racism, be it what we're talking about tonight, you know, we pull together and we come together. And for me, you know, I turn to the law for that. Other people turn to other types of organization, but we find a way to say, this is not who we are, and we find a way to try and give justice to victims of that kind of hatred. And so it made me tremendously sad to talk to the survivors and hear their stories, but it also made me tremendously proud of the fact that they trusted me with their stories, and that I was part of a system that had as its goal and at its heart justice for them. And I've kept that with me ever since then, actually. I was fortunate enough to be back in Rwanda a few weeks ago and to revisit some of the locations. And I think about that when I'm sitting in the Attorney General's office. You know, I think someone asked me, how am I doing? It's been a bad day or a difficult day. It's like, I'm alive, no one's chasing me with a machete.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm good. But what I think about is that throughout this world, and even more and more throughout this country, there are people who can't say that.
Yeah.
You know, they can't say that. And I have the ability to do something about that. I have the ability, and I have the team, and I have dedicated people who work all day and well into the night to stop that and to do something about that and to find justice for people. And so what I've realized is I cannot guarantee the absence of discrimination or hatred or or prejudice, but I can guarantee the presence of justice. So that's why that was rewarding to me.
I can't think of a better word to end on, Attorney General. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I think hearing your reassuring words at this challenging time for our country and for the American Muslim community is just so meaningful to us. So thank you again. And everyone, please join me in thanking the Attorney General.
Thank all of you.